All right. Looks like people are starting to come in. Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let's see, we're at about 50 people in so far, and we've got over 100 signed up. So we're going to hang out for just a couple minutes. So make yourself comfortable, grab a drink. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful day. Well, depending on where you are. All right, Laura, you have to tell me truthfully. Do you have comfortable pajama pants on, or did you get fully head to toe? I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours.
I have on jeans actually, but I could have on pajamas right now and nobody would know.
That is, I'm wearing yoga pants. I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty. I was like, slip on a nice shirt, yoga pants, why not? My husband and I did a date night recently, and I put on jeans, and he was like, wow, I hardly recognize you. That's great. It's been so long. Oh, goodness. All right. We're touching the, oh, yay. Thank you, Nilu. You're also in yoga pants. Love it. Joining us from New York. I miss you, my dear. Perfect, perfect. And that's a great point. So we're upping over, miss you too. We're just over 100 people. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes for others to join, because we have well over 100 signed up today. So this is a very exciting talk. And Nilu kicked us off with a chat box to the right side. So something for all of you to know, we welcome and encourage you to write in any and all of your questions and comments today. Laura is a very engaged speaker. She loves conversation. And so we're going to try to ask her questions throughout. So please do input any of your thoughts and questions in there. So I'm going to wait just one more minute and then we'll get started.
Lindsay, so far, where are people coming from?
Well, I like that. Can we start? Let's see. I know Nilu's in New York, but where's everybody from today? Oh, Mexico.
Nice.
Mexico, love it. Michigan, Sarah, San Francisco, San Jose, awesome. Oakland. Oh, wow. Yes, guys, keep them coming in. I love it. This is amazing. Welcome. And can everybody
so where we got?
Oh my goodness, they're all Olympia, Washington, San Diego, nice. Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Bay Area. Love it. Welcome everyone. Well, if you're in the Bay Area, at least San Francisco, where Laura and I are, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous day.
It is.
Perfect. Suzanne from Ohio, Houston, Texas. Yes, love it, guys. Perfect. Okay, cool. Bend, Oregon. All right.
That's my mom.
Hello, my mom. I love it. All right, great. Thank you guys. Yes, please do keep chatting in with us. Well, we want to thank you so much for tuning in to today's talk with international speaker and author Laura Putnam. On the title today is Keeping It Together When the World Feels Like It's Falling Apart, Love and Life in the Time of COVID-19. I'm Lindsay Johnson, founder and CEO of FitPros. We are a workplace wellness service provider. I am so grateful that FitPros has had the opportunity to work with many of you on the line today. But for those of you who we've not had the privilege of working with, please visit fitpros.com to learn more about our virtual services, care packages, and future on-site services when you're back in the office. So during today's session, we welcome you to write your questions in the chat box, and as appropriate, I will chime into Laura's session with your questions. Today, Laura will share insights that draw from science, psychology, philosophy, and literature to provide answers as well as practical strategies to help you sustain well-being, purpose, and a sense of meaning throughout these very weird times and beyond. So a little bit about Laura. Laura Putnam is the CEO and founder of Motion Infusion and author of Workplace Wellness That Works, one of my favorite professional books. Her work has been covered on MSNBC, the New York Times, US News and World Report, Entrepreneur, Business Insider, and NPR. Wow. Laura is a former urban public high school teacher, international community organizer, dancer, gymnast, and now a movement builder in the world of health and fitness. Quick little backstory. So after seeing Laura speak at a conference in 2016, I immediately read her book, Why Workplace Wellness Works. That was FitPro's first year in business. And so after reading her book, it reassured me that well-being in the workplace is so needed. Then, this was about a year and a half ago, I'd say, I saw Laura in a yoga class in San Francisco. And in true fangirl fashion, my first words for her, to her were, hi, Laura, I highlighted nearly every line in your book. Well, today I'm proud to call Laura a friend that I admire so greatly. Laura, thank you for joining us today to share your knowledge on love and life in the time of COVID.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. And so before we jump in, I'm going to ask you one quick personal question. So, Laura, can you tell us, okay, I got it. We're going to go with, can you tell us one person on the top of your fangirl list that you admire, someone that you've read their book or listened to their podcast, and tell us a little bit about why you admire that person so much.
So that person, in addition to my mom, and of course I have to say that because she's on the call, but it's actually true. But besides my mom and also my sister, the three of us are really a team, help each other out a lot. I would say Arianna Huffington. And in fact, when I first got the contract to write Workplace Wellness That Works, I got this very heavy-handed contract in which I had 4 months to write the book. And I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? And so I actually literally got a picture of Arianna Huffington. Her book, Thrive, has her picture on the front. I took that book, I put it in a recipe book holder, and I propped it up beside my laptop, and I said, okay, Arianna, if you can write 13 books, I can write one, and I'm going to channel you as I make my way to write this book. And I'll have you know, a big person who played a big role in my writing this book, doing tons and tons of editing, are actually both my mom and my sister. So, but you know, one of the things that I really admire about Arianna Huffington, and something that I'm really trying to do in the work that I'm doing now, is I think she's a great translator. So what I mean by that is that there's all this information that's out there when it comes to our health and our fitness and our overall well-being. So much great research, like incredible amount of research that's been done around what movement does for not only our bodies, but our brains. But there's not enough that's gone toward the translation of that really good information. And so how do we close what I call the knowing and doing gap? That is, when it comes to fitness and overall well-being, by and large, people know what to do. They just don't do it. So that's what I think Arianna Huffington does a really good job of. She's a great translator. And that's a lot of what the work that I'm doing now is I'm trying to be a really good translator, closing that gap between the two. So that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today.
Love that.
How do we translate what we know we should be doing and actually do it? So I want to
completely
start
agree.
off, so thank you all so much for having me, and thanks to everybody who's listening in. I want to start off first with sharing a little bit about love in the time of cholera, and as the title of this session suggests, yes, this was inspired by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's book, Love in the Time of Cholera. And I think that we're all experiencing this time right now where this is an unimaginable time for all of us. And yes, we need to turn to science, but at the same time, we're up against these huge existential questions. And as we're trying to navigate this unprecedented time, we need to turn to other sources as well. And one of my favorite sources is actually literature. And times in my life when I have had the most difficult time kind of putting one foot in front of the other. Like, for example, after I lost my dad, who died of also actually an epidemic, very unexpected, is I kept thinking about Milan Kundera's book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. And I found that turning to literature was a way that I could make sense of moving forward beyond my own personal loss. So I think that all of us are in this time where we are either directly impacted by COVID-19 or we are indirectly impacted by it, just seeing what's happening in the news, or we are all experiencing what researchers call anticipatory grief. That is this sense of doom or this sense of dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe we haven't been directly impacted by it yet, but we're all anticipating that we might be. And so how do we navigate that? How do we move forward? And so I think that reading books like Love in the Time of Cholera can be helpful, because it is a reminder that this is not the first time that we've faced this kind of a pandemic. Cholera was actually a pandemic that happened consecutively 6 times in a row. It's sweeping the globe from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And so in the midst of all that, people still had to live their lives, and people had love affairs and they raised families. All of this amidst the time of cholera. And so I think that that's really relevant to what we're facing today. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to cover 3 questions. And the first one is, what do I need to know? And then we'll be looking at what do I need to do? And then finally, how do I cope? And the third part is really what we're going to be focusing on the most during this webinar. So I want to go ahead and kick off with our first poll. So Jasmine, if you could go ahead and kick us off with that. And also one thing, as Lindsay already mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions or comments as we're going through this, please feel free to enter those into the chat box. And both Lindsay and Jasmine have promised me that they will read those out along the way. So I really encourage that. So we've got our first poll here. And I'd just like for you to think about, I think we're all asking ourselves a lot of questions, but what's the question you've been asking yourself the most? First one being, how do we get here to where we are now? Second being, what's the nature of this pandemic? The third, how is the US doing compared to other countries? What are new developments that are happening? So I see a lot that are coming in for that. And then the question, is the cure worse than the disease? This is obviously quoting Trump on this. Another way of phrasing that last question is, are you finding yourselves asking, that you're asking the question, you know, what's the balance between lives and livelihood? That is saving lives, but also allowing people the opportunity to be able to engage in their livelihoods. So I think we're going to take about 5 more seconds on this, and then we can go ahead and start to wrap this up, Jasmine. So Jasmine, go ahead and end the poll, and let's see where we come out. All right, so it looks like that 50% of you are interested in seeing what are the new developments that are coming in. And then it looks like that behind that is how do we get to where we are now? And then is the cure worse than the disease? And then the other 2 following behind that. Okay, terrific. So let's go ahead and move forward on this, and I'm going to touch on all of these, and it looks like that there's the most excitement around this question of what are the new developments that are happening. Okay, so let's go ahead and close the poll if we could, Jasmine, and we can move forward on this. And hopefully you all had a chance to be able to see those results. Okay, so, and Jasmine, if you don't mind going ahead and closing that, or actually it looks like I can. Okay, perfect. So how did we get to where we are now? I mean, it's kind of amazing to think that this has happened so fast. So kind of a brief timeline here of our COVID-19 timeline of events is January is what I call the China wave. So this is where the first cases, the first cluster of 41 patients actually was identified on December 31st. And these were all associated with people who had been at the Huanan seafood wholesale market in Wuhan, and 41 people came down with kind of a mystery pneumonia, and that's where we first started seeing this happen. Now, very interestingly enough, though, we know that there's new evidence coming out that while we all thought that this was just happening in January, in fact, there were probably a lot of cases that were also happening here in the United States and around the world in January, but they just weren't showing up until February. So February is where we start to see the epidemic starting to spread to places like South Korea. You may remember there was a big uptick in South Korea. Iran was one of the early countries that really had a lot of early cases. And then of course, Italy, as we all know, was really hit hard by that. And then by March, this is when the World Health Organization said, yes, we've got a pandemic on our hands. This is when we started really seeing evidence of this on a worldwide scale. And then we move into April. Already we've got 1 million who are testing positive, and we've really pretty much got a global lockdown around the globe. We're now, if you can believe it, now 3 million of those that have been tested worldwide, and we've got over 1 million just in the United States today. We've got over 200,000 deaths worldwide, and nearly 56,000 deaths just here in the United States. So this has happened all very, very quickly. So what is the nature of the pandemic itself? And I know that you all have had a lot of people that have already spoken about the pandemic. I just want to make very clear, I am not a physician, nor am I an expert on this, just sharing information that's out there. But certainly if you want to get some more information about the nature of the pandemic, then Lindsay, you want to chime in real quick, some of the webinars that you've already had that have addressed more of the science behind this and from physicians. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, FIPROS has a number of physicians that we have vetted and screened and have put together talks directly relating to the topic and their expertise on that. So if anybody's interested in having a physician talk to your group, please send us an email at hello@fipros.com. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so just a few things to keep in mind. One thing I think that's really interesting is that this is the first pandemic that's known to be caused by a novel virus. And one of the things that's so difficult about getting our arms around this is the fact that it continues to mutate. Something that I think a lot of scientists have known for a long time, but it's taken a longer time for politicians to catch up with this is problematically, there are many who are, this is actually a typo here. There are many that are contagious before they start showing symptoms. And that's one of the reasons why it has spread as quickly as it has. And then third, I think the thing that we really need to keep in mind about this pandemic is, yes, it affects all ages and all groups, but it affects more, some more than others. So we know that some are more vulnerable than others. So people who are older are more vulnerable, people who have pre-existing conditions are more vulnerable. But we're also seeing that this is impacting different groups disproportionately. So we know, for example, that the coronavirus has disproportionately impacted African Americans and Latinos. And this has more to do with socioeconomic factors. A lot of African Americans are in those essential jobs, so are at greater risk. We know that this has a lot to do with something that we in the United States are really having to come to terms with, and that is we have actually the highest level of income inequality here in the United States since the 1920s. So the pandemic itself is something that's difficult for us to be able to deal with, but on top of that, it is hitting what we might characterize as a fragile society. So this is an article that just came out in the New York Times recently that really brings this income divide, this income inequality that our country is facing to light, which is one rich New York hospital got Warren Buffett's help. This one got duct tape. So we have had a disproportionate allocation of resources. A great example of that is we have all of these pro basketball players who are getting tested early on. And meanwhile, it's really difficult for the rest of us to be able to get access to those tests. So we've got a lot of heartbreaking stories of everyday people, but also healthcare workers. One story I heard recently is a healthcare worker who had asked 4 times for the test and was not able to get it. And she believed that she had been infected, and which she had, and she actually died recently. And again, very disproportionate allocation of testing, but also we're seeing that without a society that's really thinking about how do we create some stopgaps for everybody and not just a few, then we're seeing this disproportionate impact. All right, so this ties really nicely to our next question. How is the US doing compared to other countries? And I think that this is where, for me personally, it gets so frustrating because the formula around what we need to be doing is so straightforward. We just don't seem to have the political will, except in a few pockets here in the United States, to really do what it takes to be able to do as well as, frankly, other countries are doing in the world. So we look, for example, at South Korea, which, as we talked about earlier, had an early spike, but because of massive testing and also a really good job on contact tracing, they were able to bring it down very quickly. We look at countries like the Czech Republic. They had an early masks for all campaign. So in addition to social distancing, personal hygiene, really emphasizing masks for all, and that really helped to keep their curve down. Germany, great example of a country that has universal health care, but also really has a sense of focusing on the collective good. And so they are now at a point where they are beginning what they're characterizing as a cautious re-entry. And the only way that they're able to do that is through this really well-organized, coming from on a national level effort to treat those people who need it, identify those people who are sick, so massive testing, and then making sure that a lot of safeguards are put in place as they begin to slowly reopen. So for example, one of the things that they have apparently are these taxis, these taxi hospitals that go around. So healthcare workers are going to the homes of people who've been identified as having the virus and providing them the treatment that they need, again, to really be able to help with this cautious reentry. And then perhaps most exciting, the examples of Australia and New Zealand, who have worked together to not just bring the curve down, not just working to flatten the curve, but to eliminate it altogether. So news just came out yesterday that New Zealand has successfully, effectively eliminated the virus altogether. There's one case that they've got isolated that they're taking care of, but otherwise they seem to have eliminated it altogether. So again, no mystery on this, and something we'll be talking about in just a moment, but we just have to have the political will, just like these other countries, to really be able to grapple with this better. So on a more positive note, what are some new developments that are happening? I think it's really exciting what the Gates Foundation has been doing. So for example, they just came out with a a white paper that talks about what are some of the new developments. But one of the things that they're doing is they're trying to really get testing out on a wider scale. So they're developing home test kits. There's some interesting pockets of places like, this is actually in Telluride. There are a couple of guys who have a biomedical company, and they are funding testing for everybody in San Miguel County. And this is really good data for all of us to kind of see what's happening over a trajectory, how many people are showing evidence of having some immunity, so we can start to move toward herd immunity, which we know is something that we all want to have in place. We know very excitingly here in the state of California, Governor Newsom successfully secured a deal where we're going to be getting 200 million masks a month for our healthcare workers. And so many masks that perhaps we're going to be able to share this with some of our Western state friends, like the state of Oregon, the state of Washington. And then most exciting, an article that just came out yesterday about physician, or a researcher rather, by the name of Dr. Adrian Hill at Oxford in the UK, who is showing some promising signs on their research there on development of a vaccine. So, last question, is the cure worse than the disease? Or wording it another way, what's the balance between saving lives, and also protecting our livelihoods? So this is a question that people by the name, for example, Dr. David Katz, has been asking this question for quite some time. So he calls it total harm minimization. So certainly he's been writing a lot of articles about this. He's been quoted by people like Thomas Friedman. So it's a question worth considering, but what we do know is that the only way we're going to be able to start to reopen safely, we know that there's some states like the state of Georgia that are already opening up barbershops and nail salons without the testing that needs to be in place, without the contact tracing that needs to be in place, and without any kind of evidence that the number of cases are actually going down. There are better ways to do it. I'm very interested to see what Governor DeWine is going to be doing in the state of Ohio. In my view, great example of a leader who is focusing more on the science as opposed to the politics. And so in my view, he's probably going to be doing a better job than what we're seeing in the state of Georgia in terms of opening back up. All right, so next question. What should we be doing? And again, Lindsay and Jasmine, feel free to feed me any questions or comments as we go through this. But I think it perhaps best stated by Anthony Fauci is mitigate, mitigate, mitigate. That's our best chance right now. We do not have a vaccine. We do not have any treatments, as we all know. We do not have any treatments right now that can work to effectively treat the virus. So our best chances here to save the most number of lives as possible, and also to get us to reopen our economies, is simply to mitigate. So, looking back in history, when I was an urban public high school teacher, I was actually a history teacher, so I like to look back in history. But I was in the city of Salzburg summer before last with my mom and sister, and one thing that I learned when I was there that's really interesting is that Salzburg has for centuries had a regular practice of washing the streets. And that practice, while they didn't know that this would have anything to do with containing a pandemic, that practice alone apparently is what spared them from the bubonic plague, which, as we know, killed millions of people over decades, if not hundreds of years. So what does that mean for us? It means we need to wash our hands and stop touching our faces. Some interesting research around that. Apparently on average, one study found that we touch our faces on average about 16 times an hour. Another study found that it was about 23 times an hour. So it's actually really hard to do. So just like we do for our pets, maybe we need to do this for ourselves to get ourselves to stop touching our faces. All right. So really the what I want to focus on the most now is this idea of, you know, how do I cope in the midst of all of this? So why don't we go ahead and launch our second poll here, Jasmine? So thinking about how you cope, which of these, you get to pick just one, which of these are you finding that you are doing the most? Spending time with family, and that can virtually counts on that as well. So in our family, we've been doing a lot of staying in touch with email chains and on text, but also with Zoom calls, exercise, writing or journaling, going into nature. We've certainly seen a lot of that in the Bay Area, perhaps a little too much. We've had to close down some trails because a lot of people have been going out to nature, artistic pursuits, maybe watching a lot of TV. I know we've been watching a lot of movies on TV here, munching perhaps, or perhaps eating healthy foods, and then video games. So why don't we give it a couple more seconds here, Jasmine, and then we can go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like what's coming out on top here are exercise and spending time with family. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up the poll here, and you can share the results here. So it looks like exercise was the winner. Definitely something that I'm seeing a lot of. And I think that, just as I mentioned at the beginning, moving our bodies, whether it's indoors or outdoors, whether it's formal exercise or doing household cleaning, getting up onto our feet and simply moving our bodies a little bit, right, is one of the very, very best things that we can do for our bodies and our brains and our overall well-being, not only in regular times, but particularly right now. So let's go ahead and we can stop sharing that. So looks like, hold on. Okay, so I like to, you know, in this time, kind of what do I do to cope? The first thing that you can be thinking about is channeling Viktor Frankl. So you may remember the story of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychologist, and he was held in a concentration camp during World War II. He lost his entire family during this time. So obviously went through immense suffering. And during that time, he came up with this idea that, you know, between stimulus, or what we might characterize as the circumstances in our lives, between that stimulus and our response, there is a space. And he talked about this being our inner freedom. So in other words, while we may have little or no control over the circumstances in our lives, case in point, the pandemic that we are facing as a global community right now, we have infinite power as to how we respond to those circumstances. And right now, those are very difficult circumstances. So perhaps one of the best examples of somebody who really modeled expanding that space between the circumstances and how we respond is Nelson Mandela. So 27 years in prison. And apparently one of the things that he did while he was in prison was to learn the language of the prison guards. So he himself spoke a language called Xhosa, English, but the language that most of the prison guards were speaking was a language called Afrikaans. And so he learned Afrikaans during this time as a way to get to know the prison guards as people. And this was a way for him to cope at the time. But interestingly enough, when he was elected president post-apartheid South Africa in 1994, this experience of having learned Afrikaans and having reached across the line was what really enabled him to bring the country back together, So during, so for example, one of the early things that he did was to launch the Truth and Reconciliation Committee hearings, giving people the opportunity to be able to share their stories on both sides and allow a time for reconciliation and healing. But again, really powerful example of what can happen when we focus less on the circumstances and more on how we respond. So this is something that we can really be thinking about right now. That is, how do I respond to this trying time? So one of the things that we can be doing right now is simply to cover the basics. So if there is ever a time where there is a case for self-care and well-being and overall health, all the basics, it is now, truly.
Laura.
Getting enough sleep. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So we had a question come in, and this kind of backs up a little bit to Nelson Mandela, because the question is, how do you be at your best even in these times when our liberties are being put to the test? Yeah. So can you offer some recommendations on, we're feeling pretty worn down, we're stuck inside, and even when we go outside, we kind of get yelled at, like what, any recommendations on how to pause and switch that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I'm going to be touching on. I think I'm assuming that this is somebody in the United States. This idea of individual liberties is really foundational to who we are as Americans. And that is really being put to the test right now. And so my suggestion to that question is to really think first and foremost about how much the collective good matters so much. And the best thing that we can actually do for ourselves is right now to focus on the collective good. And while that is challenging because we have such a deep sense of that need for individual liberties, and certainly this is a theme that's coming out in a lot of the protests that we're seeing, my personal perspective on that is that, especially in a time like right now, we have to focus on the collective good. Mm-hmm. But I will address that question more specifically in just a moment as well. But it's a great question. And certainly, I think that that's part of the circumstance that we have to acknowledge is something that to a large extent is beyond our control. But it is difficult, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Lindsay, did you get another question that came in, or?
Yeah, just spinning off that, Nancy just asked, how do I respond when I'm taking a walk with my mask on, and to those who don't, without becoming angry? So for people that are, say, gathering in big groups in a park, which I encountered this weekend in San Francisco, or people that are not, like, and I think you'll get to this in a little bit, in self-care, but if you could touch on how do I handle my own personal anger about the situation, I'm doing my part and no one else is.
Well, first of all, know that you're not alone. Just recently, Chris, my fiance, and I were walking, and there were a couple of kids who were on their bikes, and both of us had moved over as far as we possibly could. There was a fence on one side. We were up against the fence, and these two young men, they chose to bike right beside us, and I yelled out, I was like, social distancing, give us some space here. And Chris followed up. And so their response was yelling out that we were losers. So, I mean, this is just happening. But, again, I think that this really speaks to the power of national policy. If we had a national policy around wearing your mask, everybody would be doing it. And so, again, looking at where we are relative to a country like the Czech Republic, that just flat out is what the policy is. So, we're starting to see more and more of those kind of policies being issued on a local level as well as on a state level around wearing your masks in public. But I personally think that the only way to be able to really get widespread use of those is if there's actually a policy in place. So it is a challenge, but again, know that if you are feeling angry, you're not alone. And I think that, hopefully people will continue to focus on what is, the collective good. What's good for all of us is actually good for us individually as well. And that includes wearing a mask when we're in public. Okay, so covering the basics, and again, Lindsay, if questions come in, feel free to ask those. But I just cannot underestimate just how important those basics are. My aunt had a great sticker on her refrigerator once that read, "The bridge between despair and hope is a good night's sleep." So getting enough sleep, eating well, getting exercise and doing it in a way that's safe, engaging in whatever practice it is that works for you to quiet your mind. All of these are really important things to be doing right now. Very interestingly, I think that in a troubled time like right now, one thing that can happen is that even if we go to bed on time, many of us may be finding that it's hard to sleep. So one of the best things that you can do is to get early exposure to sunshine. So this is a picture taken from one of our morning walks. Chris and I have started a regular practice of walking around the Palace of Fine Arts, which is right around the corner from us. And not only is it a way to get a little bit of exercise, but we're getting exposure to natural light first thing in the morning. And this is one of the best things that we can be doing to keep our circadian rhythm on track. So that's something to be thinking about. But again, the basics, we all know this. And again, it's a good time to be putting those into practice. So I want to kind of talk for the latter part of our discussion here around, and this addresses questions like the one around, we're feeling our individual liberties being taken away from us. What can we do? So this is a time for all of us to tap into what I characterize as a universal roadmap. That is, these universally are our deepest human needs, and this is based on decades of social science research, primarily the self-determination theory, Ryan and Dece's social determination theory. So I'm going to break that down for you all a little bit, but I think that this is a nice roadmap for all of us to be thinking about right now. Again, how do we expand the space between the circumstances and how we respond? And one of the ways that we can do that is to really start to incorporate this universal roadmap in terms of what we do. So one of our deepest human needs is the need for competency or a sense of mastery. So we go out on any playground and you're bound to hear a kid shouting out, "Mom, Mom," or "Dad, look at me, look at me." Well, that actually doesn't really change as we become adults. And that is, we want to be recognized for what we do well, the things that we master, the things that we accomplish. And I think that for many of us, we derive our sense of competency from the work that we do. And when we are not at work, when we are sheltering at home, that can be more challenging in this time. So one of the things that I've been doing, not only to take care of the basics, but also to feel a sense of competency, is I've been doing a ton of cooking. Chris has actually been doing a lot of baking, and I am so sorry that I forgot to put in one of the fabulous pictures here, one of his amazing sourdough bread loaves that he's been making. But it's a way of feeling a sense of competency. One thing that we've been seeing a lot, sorry about that, is seeing a lot of people coming out with rediscovering hobbies. So things like origami or doodling or sewing, or even making masks. These are all kind of a rediscovery of hobbies. And this is a way to have fun, but also certainly it's a way to feel a sense of competency. So perhaps this is a good time for you right now to be exploring some of your past hobbies. And also, I think in the area of competency, as things kind of slow down a little bit as we're in this sheltering in place, it's a time to go deep. And so one of the things that I personally have been doing, I've been using this time to work on my book, my next book. So whatever is a big project that you have that perhaps has been on the back burner, now is a good time to be using this time to really go deep into that. Okay, this is the piece that ties to that earlier question about our civil liberties being taken away. And yes, we are hardwired with a need for autonomy. That is, nobody wants to be told what to do. Chris often reminds me about how he does not like to be micromanaged. None of us do. we all want to feel a sense of control. We all want to feel a sense of, that we have choice. And to a large extent, some of our regular choices have been taken away from us. And it's very interesting because if you look at what are the biggest drivers of stress, one of the biggest drivers of stress is actually a perceived lack of control. So if you are feeling stressed right now, again, you are not alone, and there are good reasons why you are feeling that. So very interesting, a large Harvard study looked at the question, as an individual, as I move up the hierarchy in an organization, do my stress levels go up or down? And let's actually, I'm curious, write in your answers right now. Let's see what we get. What do you think? As you move up in an organization, do your stress levels go up or do they go down? So put in up if you think your stress levels go up, put in down if you think that your stress levels go down as you move up in an organization. And Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind reading out some of the what you're getting, that would be great.
We've got quite a few up so far. Someone says it depends on the company culture in place, depends on the company. And I actually have a question that kind of relates to this topic. And it says, do you have any suggested minimum of how much leadership team should be facilitating the social connection among employees?
Yes. So let me come back to that question about what leaders can be doing, particularly managers.
Yes.
So don't let me forget that, because I want to hold on to that question, and I will answer that question because, right now, leaders, particularly managers, actually matter a lot, and there's a lot that they can be doing in this time. So what have we got in terms of up or down?
Lots of ups, and it entirely depends on the company. Let's see. Yeah, mostly ups. Okay.
So maybe you're right, but according to this study that looked across multiple industries, they actually found it was just the opposite. Mm-hmm. That is, research shows that our stress levels go down as we move up an organization. And yes, we have a lot more responsibility. Yes, we're responsible for more people, perhaps have more on our plate, are more visible. But as we move up in an organization, our stress levels actually go down. And the reason is, again, according to research like this study, and I'm happy to follow up, Lindsay, and send a link to that study if you want to check it out. Mm-hmm. But the reason is because our perceived sense of control goes up as we move up in an organization. So again, pointing to this huge stressor that when our control is taken away from us, when our autonomy is taken away from us, it really is a huge stress driver. So that's just something to keep in mind as you move up in an organization. Your stress levels are actually going down, according to research. So that's a good segue to leaders and managers, what they can be doing right now. So one of the things that they can be doing is really to be understanding that their role right now really, really matters. And in just 2 seconds, I'm going to show you what you can be doing. So one of the things that I personally have been doing around to retain a sense of control, you can see my fabulously recently reorganized, color coordinated desk drawer here, file drawer here. But this gives me a sense of control because I'm feeling the same thing. Like, it gets hard day in and day out. We just got notice that we're on lockdown for another month here in the state of California. So cleaning up is one of the best things that we can do. And I often channel my grandmother, who my grandmother was married not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times. And apparently after her 3rd marriage fell apart, she opened the door to her bedroom and she looked out over a room that was a mess. And she said, I'm going to clean up my room and I'm going to clean up my life. So a lot to be said for cleaning up as a way to feel a little bit of sense of control. So what are the things that are within your domain that you do have control over? So this brings us to relatedness, and this brings us back to what leaders and managers can be doing. And certainly this is a time when we are feeling disconnected, and this is the time when leaders and managers matter a lot. So we've been working a lot with a company called, well, you all know it, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota. And their CEO has been using this time to send out what he calls, his name is Dan Conrad, and he has these messages from Dan that he sends out regularly. And in those messages from Dan, he is highlighting well-being right now, taking care of ourselves right now. And so and also sharing some vulnerability, sharing ways that he is investing in his own well-being and in his self-care, and even sharing ways that has been personally challenging for him. This is so important for leaders to be doing this right now, showing that kind of vulnerability, talking, but also helping employees to feel like that they are seen not just for what they do, but for who they are as human beings. Now, dropping down a level to managers, oh my goodness, you matter so much right now to your team. There is so much that you can be doing to really fostering connections between your team members, between yourself and your team. Your team is really relying on you right now. Some interesting Gallup research showing that, believe it or not, people, the best thing that you can do as a manager is to be providing a lot of positive feedback to your team members. But the second best thing is actually to be providing negative feedback. And the worst is to be providing no feedback at all. So believe it or not, people would actually rather get negative feedback than no feedback. And the rule of thumb, the research shows coming from Gallup as well as extensive research with the ADP Research Institute is that if you're a manager, you want to be touching base with your team members, hopefully on a one-on-one basis, at least once a week. Once a week seems to really be the rule of thumb. So there's lots of things that you can be doing in the way of phone calls or Zoom calls with your team to really be fostering those connections. So one of the managers that I've been working with at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota, they've all, as a team, they've all developed their CB handles. And this whole kind of CB language that they engage in just as a way of kind of keeping some team spirit. So this is something that actually happened in China. People started writing into singers, and these singers would respond to requests for karaoke. So kind of a fun way to keep connections between people. Before I move on to the next piece, Lindsay, you look like you maybe had a comment or question that you wanted to ask.
Well, actually, yeah. So, I mean, I think this spins off really nicely into something that like we're doing right now. May, as you know, is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's just a couple of days away. And, you know, one of the promotions that we recently launched is called #EmotionalFluency. And we're encouraging people to submit a video of them doing something that makes them happy, something that relieves stress. We've got, we can put the link in the questions here, but you've got people quilting, you've got people dancing and singing. We've got a married couple that survived Corona, older couple, and so they did a dance to "I Will Survive." And the point being is we're encouraging companies to do little promotions like this and involve your executive leaders, your managers, and make the conversation a topic, because people are feeling isolated right now. I think the purpose of, you know, a couple of these past slides is like, we want to feel useful, we want to feel cared for, and how can we do that with one another? So this emotional fluency campaign that we came up with was just one example of like, how can we help people relate? And so I think I just love what you're touching on here is people just want to be heard and supported. So not really a question.
Absolutely. They want to know that they're cared for. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Chris, with his team, he's got teams that are based in Ohio and teams that are based in Indiana. And he's been doing some team-based challenges similar to along the lines of what you're talking about. So he challenged everybody to get out into nature and to take a photograph of something that they find in nature or create a video. And he made it a little contest, but people had so much fun, and it was a really nice way to be able to keep that team spirit alive. All right, so the next thing, we all have a deep, deep need for a sense of purpose. And perhaps this is one of our deepest needs of all. So use this time right now to really clarify, what are your deepest values? What is it, what's the meaning of your life? What is your deepest why? So it might be a good time for you to read Start With Why, Simon Sinek's book. But just to think about, what is my why for me individually? Perhaps this is something you could think about as a team, as an organization. It's a really good time to be clarifying that. And then from there, what do I need to be doing and how do I do it from there? All right, this brings us to our last piece as part of the universal roadmap, which is play. We all have a deep need for play. So I love John Krasinski's Some Good News, but there is so much good stuff out there that's really playful. Just this past Saturday night, Brad Pitt did a great impersonation of Anthony Fauci, but also a really touching message at the end. But I think that fun is one of our best avenues to connecting with one another, as also as a way of feeling sane as we move through this. So we're going to have a final poll here, and Jasmine, if you want to go ahead and launch that in our last couple of minutes. So to cope in thinking about this universal roadmap here, which of these 5 elements are you going to focus on most? Are you going to focus most on your need for competency, your need for autonomy, your need for relatedness, your need for purpose, or your need for play? And I'll have, it's interesting. I think sometimes in a time like this, it really, while it's been difficult, it also provides an opportunity. So I know that there have been a lot of friends that I've connected with that I haven't connected with in a long time because of COVID-19, because of our of sheltering in place. Within our family, we've been connecting a lot more as well. So some really amazing things that can happen. Apparently Galileo, when he was quarantined during the bubonic plague, this is when he came up with some of his greatest discoveries. So maybe there's a discovery that you can be making right now to use this time best. So let's go ahead and end the poll. And it looks like that the one that won out here was purpose. Is what people are going to be focusing on the most. So maybe this is a good time for you to start journaling. There was an article that I recently read that suggested the idea of having a COVID-19 journal. So maybe something to be thinking about, kind of given the circumstances that we're up against, what are the things that matter most to me? And now's a really good time to be thinking about that. Okay, so you see the results here, so we can go ahead and close that up. So this is, kind of as we think about how can I not only survive, but even thrive in a time like this. In the American context, and I think also in many other cultural contexts as well, this need for independence, individuality, is one of our most treasured values. And right now, that is something that perhaps we are challenged with the most. And so because of this focus on individuality, it is no wonder that in both in health as well as well-being, the messages that we have classically heard have all revolved around this idea of taking personal responsibility. And not to say that we shouldn't be taking personal responsibility, but if there's anything that we have learned from COVID-19, it is that collective responsibility is what really matters right now. The collective good is what matters most right now. And we might say that there is no me without you. In other words, my health matters to you and your health matters to me. And the only way forward through this, in addition to knowing what we need to know, doing what we need to be doing, and coping with things like focusing on the response over the circumstances, putting into practice those basic elements of well-being, and then tapping into that universal roadmap of really finding ways to meet our need for competency, autonomy, relatedness, purpose, and play. On top of all of that, to know that the only way through this is together. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for being with me today. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you, Fit Pros. This has been awesome being with all of you. And if you have any questions or comments, I am more than happy to take those. You're welcome to reach out to me. And if you would like a copy of the slide deck, I'm happy to have that sent to you as well. So Lindsay, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. And one more plug for Laura's Workplace Wellness, That Works book. Highly recommended. As mentioned, I seriously highlighted nearly every line in that book because it was so spot on with how companies can improve the well-being of their employees. Any questions about how you can bring new programs, whether it virtually or in the future on site in your office, please send FitPros an email at hello@fitpros.com. We'd love to brainstorm with you on how we can support you and your staff. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you all soon on another webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Bye, Laura.
Thank you.
See you later.
And if you want to connect by phone, I'm happy to.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Sounds good.